Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Biotech and Health Extension Group, sponsored by 100 Plus Capital. I'm really excited today to have Dominik Thor here today, and you'll be discussing a really interesting new project that just popped up on our radar, and that's unlocking potential rationale for longevity education programs. I think you're much better equipped to tell everyone about it than I am, even though I've learned a little bit about it now through various conversations. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'll share a lot more info about you here in the chat. And in the meantime, please take it away. We're excited to have you. And yeah, feel free to start sharing slides now.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Alison, for having me today and giving me the opportunity to share a little bit on what we have been building over the last few years. I will share my notes now. I hope you can see them. But before we start, maybe I give you a short intro on what Geneva College of Longevity Science is. So basically, when I was still a researcher doing longevity research, I've been working with a number of universities internationally. So in the US and the EU, my background is you probably hear it on the German speakers. I'm from German-speaking Europe. And the problem was that the state-funded universities, they have a clear mandate of what they are supposed to do. If they're a medical university, they're interested in longevity research, obviously, but mostly focused, of course, on medical application. And there are other aspects to it too, as probably everybody in this group knows. Psychological factors are important, lifestyle intervention too. And we felt as a group that we need a place that really looks holistically at longevity science and establishes this as an academic field. Long story short, we decided we probably need a new private school, a private university, and we set it up in Switzerland, in Geneva, for the simple reason that from German-speaking Europe, probably Switzerland has the best ecosystem. And we're very happy that, of course, after some while, it's never easy to set something up like this, but the Swiss authorities they are strict, but in a very friendly and supportive way. And we finally got started 6 or 8 weeks ago. We are offering a master's course on longevity science that is for professionals in the field. Mostly it's medical doctors, but we do have lawyers, investors, and other people now that are working on getting their degree. And it's a fantastic experience. And what I typically like to start with is, of course, explaining why we need such longevity education programs. And this is the reason for today's talk. So we go through it, and I try to keep enough time at the end in order to answer your questions. And probably the first question that I would like to answer here is, why is there interest in longevity? And the reason is simple. If we look at this chart, for instance, we see that people live longer now than they used to, which is a wonderful thing for plenty of reasons. But obviously, this affects us all, and it starts triggering questions, not only how to further extend your lifespan and hopefully also your health span, many other things too. And there is a growing interest in longevity science in the scientific community. And you can see that also by just doing a quick research, for instance, on PubMed, where you see the number of publications in the field. And this increase in research is, of course, driven by advances in biotechnology, personalized medicine, and other adjacent fields. And I think the good thing here is, and the best is that this interest in longevity is not just shown by the scientific community, but a lot of laymen, people, normal people, are also starting to get interested in this. And we see that through many examples. This is a snapshot of a New York Times bestseller list a while back. But I think it's great to see that out of the top 5, one of them is a longevity popular science book that probably most of us here know. And I think it's just very important that we have more accessible information on longevity and what it's all about out there. And the same when we look at podcasts, in this case, the podcast chart of Spotify, where there's Huberband Lab, also very much relating to longevity science. We have a new Netflix show that has become quite popular. Of course, the blue zones have been talked about a lot, but I think not everybody associates them with longevity science. And you also see that the scientific community, when they get together and do conferences, like this one, for example, suddenly dubs them and uses longevity. I wouldn't call it as a marketing term, but certainly as something that is of interest, not only to the people attending, the doctors, but also to the patients. This is a trend that has been spotted, of course, by the big players in this case, in the wellness and beauty industry. So suddenly we see, I've taken some examples here, that these companies have taken an interest. So either working together like Estee Lauder with the Stanford Center on longevity, and Beiersdorf, like a very big German brand that is behind Bivea, and of course L'Oreal and Nestle, all investing and working on longevity in the hopes, of course, to attract new customers. But this shows that if these big companies believe that longevity is something people are interested in, there must be some truth to that. And the reason for that is because longevity, or simply the fact that we tend to live longer for multiple reasons that we will discuss later, this impacts all of us, of course, on an individual level. What you see here is, I think, a very nice traditional model of how we used to live, right? So everybody started by learning a trade or profession. And at some point, people started to work, and eventually you stop working, and the rest of your remaining years you spend maybe living on a pension. So this is the return here. It's more of an economic model, but it has changed. So currently our lives became more complex, and I think potentially more fulfilling, because suddenly we have a learning phase in the beginning, but it doesn't end. So lifelong learning is now part of many careers where people switch to different fields, maybe take a break or start a family, take some time to be at home with them, but then go back, build maybe another career, and pivot. And they tend to live longer, and hopefully this gives them additional purpose. And obviously, this has many implications, because suddenly we have to think about preventative health care, lifestyle changes that can get us to improve our health, both physically and mentally. So this is also a very important aspect of healthy longevity. It's not just the body, it's also the mind, obviously. And there are other things like personal fulfillment that plays a big role. There are very interesting studies out there that clearly show that those people that tend to live longer have a purpose in life, which can be different. It doesn't have to be a job. It can be a passionate hobby, family, close relationships, and lifelong learning, which I'm obviously a big proponent for, are also something that keeps your mind fit and are essential. And of course, unfortunately, financial planning is also an aspect of this, because if we live longer, then we have to prepare ourselves for that. And we have to prepare the healthcare system in order to make these new technologies that allow us to increase health span to accessible to everybody. We have to finance that. If we eventually we will work longer, hopefully, which I see as a big part of fulfillment in your lives. But relevant of that, there is the question of, okay, how, if we have money, how do we invest that in order to get the returns for a longer time? So this is, of course, a discussion maybe for another group, but you typically have to take more risk if you want to have more returns that last longer. So there are many factors to be considered on an individual level, but also as a society, things change here in a pyramid that reflects the life expectancy of a typical society and how it changes from the 1950s to the near future, where suddenly people on average are much older. And this again has tons of implications for all of us. And I will tell you in a minute why this also affects, of course, education. And again, it's the healthcare system. It's the question of limited resources and how to use them wisely, and to make things in terms of healthcare accessible to everybody. Because in the Western world, at least, we don't have enough young people. So we can't rely on them to pay all our pensions. Probably we have to work longer. They cannot look after us. We have to look after ourselves. We need to stay fit and healthy for a longer time. And these are very important factors in the way that our society is shifting already. And there are these economic impacts, right? As I mentioned before, workforce participation of older people that triggers things like ageism, where maybe people have the impression that older people are not as capable as younger people, which is, of course, something that's not true, or at least not entirely true, and definitely not true for everyone. So we need to overcome this, and we have to think about how to use technology to allow us to move ahead in this. And now the question, probably the second question, is why are we talking about longevity science? What is it really, and how does it differ from adjacent fields of research like medicine or gerontology? Now, I think the first problem here is that longevity is a term that is often misunderstood. Very often people that are faced with this for the first time think, okay, longevity is just about living longer. And naturally, your response very often is that they say, I'm not interested in just living longer because I remember my grandparents being sick for such a long time. Of course, the concept of compressed morbidity, staying healthy for a long time, and eventually probably we have to die. But if we do, we hope it's going to be far ahead in the future and it's not preceded by a long sickness. So therefore, there are, I would say, 3 dimensions to longevity or healthy longevity, as some people say now. This is, of course, lifespan extension, but it's also extending health span. And it's about promoting quality of life and having consistent quality of life also throughout your later stages. And that includes not just physical aspects, but also mental and social aspects. You should be able to continue interacting with others, enjoying your life, being an active part of the community. And this is what longevity is really, science really tries to promote and ensure. And doing so by scientific means, obviously. And these goals require a lot of things that need to happen. And part of them I listed here. So these are things like ultra personalized precision medicine. So I think we all understand that medicine is something that happens on a very individual level. So what works for you doesn't necessarily have to be the best treatment for everybody else. And technological innovations like new diagnostics and other things will help us a lot with this. And obviously, we need further research and policy changes to get access to these things that we already have. And of course, create new technologies and take the things that we have maybe now in a very early stage further to a clinical stage, and then hopefully to a point where patients can actually benefit from these new findings. So whenever I attend conferences, it really feels exciting to see what's happening. And at the same time, sometimes people attending these conferences for the first time, and if they're not scientists, they might get the wrong impression that these things are already available to them. The problem is, of course, and that we still talk a lot about preclinical data studies on cells or animals that cannot be extrapolated to man as of now. And education, I think, is the very important factor here because it serves as a channel to give people access to this. And by education, I don't just mean education for healthcare providers, because obviously we need doctors that know about everything that's available to them, the whole arsenal of longevity medicine. But I think it's just as important to educate policymakers, investors, and eventually everybody, including the patients, of course, because they have to make decisions about their future and how to get there. And therefore, longevity science really is a very holistic field of research that addresses, for instance, the biological mechanisms of aging, so that we better understand on a cellular level and molecular level those mechanisms that drive aging or contribute to it. We look at the diagnostics and preventative measures that are out there. So measuring, hopefully, not just the onset of chronic disease, but the signs before that, so we can take a more preventative approach. Obviously, we treat age-related diseases. We are interested in interventions for healthy longevity. So as I mentioned before, not everything is medicine. In fact, those things that work best are sometimes the most boring, or maybe not boring, but the most demanding, because it's not just one pill that you pop. It's a constant change of lifestyle that is required in order to stay fit and healthy for a long time. And that is difficult, and it has to be researched just as well as the pharmaceutical or medical therapies. And we also look at the required adaptations of our healthcare systems. Obviously, the healthcare systems differ a lot across the globe. We have, I think, very good ones in Switzerland, in German-speaking Europe in general. But at the same time, and we will cover that in a minute, medicine still has an approach of dealing with sickness as it starts materializing. So we like to have a more preventative approach. And as I mentioned before, it's not a big aspect here in this talk, but it's actually a big thing we need to overcome. It's the societal impacts and the question of financing that we also need to answer. And that is also part of longevity science. So it's not just life, so not just biological aspects, it's really all these others that also are important. And medicine, as I said, is a traditional, more reactive. And gerontology, there are different schools of gerontology. I'm aware of this. But again, it's a little bit more focused on older adults. And longevity science really is something that deals with preventative steps that you take while you're still young. Obviously, it's also something that can help people that are already of older age. But it's not the focus. So we're focusing really on the human lifespan in total at any stage. And the question why we need longevity education, I think, is best answered if we look back in history and see historical parallels. And the best one that I personally found is public health, because public health is a field of science that had a tremendous impact on the shaping of the global healthcare system and on an individual level on life expectation across the globe. The science and art of preventing disease and promoting health as a society is, of course, not an entirely new concept, but it became a scientific field maybe 150 years ago. And this has really had the biggest impact. And I personally believe that the next step in this ladder, so to speak, after public health, the next thing that gets us to move beyond the current expectations of how old we can get and how healthy we can be is going to be longevity science, which will have hopefully the same kind of impact eventually. Public health was, of course, very much of interest at a time when the situation for workers was very dire. So a lot of people think that was born in the 19th century because the Industrial Revolution has created a workforce that lived really in a very bad life condition. But actually, first public health measures or activities were taken much sooner than that all throughout human history. But the real starting point for it becoming an academic field was actually science and research. So by proving that sickness was caused by bacteria, for instance, has shown people a way that they can do something against it. So it was no longer in the hand of God or due to some personal belief. Suddenly science showed a way of what can be done. And thereby it really changed the field because suddenly the public health became a scientific enterprise. There were experts that suddenly showed that if a society sticks together and works together, there are measurable improvements for everybody. I have some examples here from the US, but I think it was very much the same almost everywhere in the Western world, that at the beginning of the 20th century, public health education became its own discipline, split from medicine as a scientific research field. And what's interesting to see is maybe just as in longevity science as of now, the very first initiatives were privately funded. There is the Johns Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health in 1960, which was the first one. But in the 30s, there were already 10, and by now there are almost 50 schools of public health in the US. So it shows almost exponential growth, at least in an academic sense. This is quite fast. So many new institutes. And the results are really impressive because over the past 150 years, life expectation has increased tremendously. And it has really changed the way that societies work together, not just a society each by each, but really on a global level. And this is required. This is something that we also need to do for longevity science, because this public health really mirrors longevity science by having the potential to change the way that we look at our lifespan, the expectations that we have. And it also is born out of research, right? So before we knew that there were bacteria that we could get rid of or secure ourselves against, we didn't know really what to do. So sanitization, water filtering couldn't have an impact because nobody thought that it would. With longevity science, it's the same. I think that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a big step forward in how we understood the process of aging or the processes, because there is not one single one identified. It's really a combination of many things. Since we have so much science and there is new science being generated every day, I can tell you that our learning materials at GCLS are being updated on a weekly basis because there's so much happening, which is fantastic. Education is important, and not just academic education. Obviously, it has to happen on many levels. And it's really a multidimensional project, so to speak. And we also have to include all the different kinds of professions that are required. So when we say it's important across diverse fields, I'm saying it's not just for medical doctors. We need to educate health administrators and policymakers because they eventually decide how you as a patient can access these new findings and how it's going to be paid for. And we need the investors when we talk about paying, that they help us back the right projects. And with early stage research in a biotech field, it's not financial numbers. They have to understand the science. And it's the same for insurance companies, because again, they are, I think, a bottleneck. They have to be the ones making new longevity diagnostics and treatments available to patients. And obviously you have other people that are important when it comes for looking after your health, like nutritionists or dietitians and fitness coaches and many more. So these are just some examples here. And how does longevity education look like? I think this is also important. And over here, you see some of the topic areas that we cover, and they come from very different backgrounds. So there is, of course, aging research, where we look at the biological mechanisms of aging and how they interact with age-associated diseases, how cognitive function is affected in age. And obviously, everything that's in the realm of preventative healthcare is super important. And there is a lot of things happening: epigenetics, advanced diagnostics, new medical treatments, with the maybe caveat that some of the things that are out there are maybe not fully proven, depending on where you are. Different kinds of medical interventions are available. It's more restrictive in the EU and the US than, for instance, maybe in the Middle East. But the idea is, without picking out anything specific, we need ultra-personalized medicine or therapy that is really down to your genetic or epigenetic makeup in order to show real results. And these results, they come from lifestyle adaptations, where nutrition, physical activity, mental health are things that have been shown to work on a major scale. There is technology that is going to help us tremendously. So artificial intelligence, everybody talks about it, but obviously it makes sense. If you create so much data with new diagnostics, you need help filtering through it. Digital health brings the doctor to your home, also very important. And the two things that I always like to mention, because everybody's so excited, of course, when we talk about new ways to treat people, but policy is important, because without that, people don't have access to all these findings. And there are the social dimensions. How do we pay for it? How is the social support? And how do we keep the workforce in place? How we ensure that older people still have the same access to community that they had before? So these are all things that I think have to be covered in longevity science education. And there are some challenges that we have to overcome. And I mentioned the first one in the beginning, where I said people misunderstand even the term longevity. And without getting rid of these misconceptions, well, there will never be enough interest in this field. And we need this interest because it drives investment, it drives research, and it drives, of course, young people into this field that are going to shape the future of it. We need more awareness, we need more funding. And I think it's also important that we at no point ever lose the cooperation or collaboration with different scientific communities that are involved in this. It's interdisciplinary. It's not just one thing. And one of the problems that happened, for instance, with public health is that there was this split, and the split was beneficial in the beginning because suddenly there was this new school of public health. It was not just part of medicine anymore. But the separation, I think, and this is the opinion of many experts at this, still is felt today where people think that medicine looks at problems differently than public health experts. And it has to be more holistic than that. So there shouldn't be any sort of split when it comes to aging research. I think we need all the insights from the different fields that we can have. And of course, there are purely educational challenges. So I think everybody agrees there is no standardized curriculum yet. So the things that I just talked about, we defined them, but probably if you talk to other experts, maybe they have a different focus and there is a resistance to change. So I know that, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I mentioned before, we initially talked to many universities as researchers trying to establish institutes there that focus on longevity holistically. And of course, people stick to what they know. And initially, they are maybe a little bit skeptical of what's happening here. And we have these policy and regulatory hurdles. It's really important that we increase the pace of translation of these findings from getting to understand them to a point where people can actually have these available to them via their doctors. This is something that, of course, is there are two sides to it. Obviously, I'm a big fan of testing things thoroughly. I very often hear about people that try things themselves that are not vetted scientifically. Biohackers, sometimes it's a good idea, very often it is. So I think we have to further continue to refine the system to have the perfect mix of safety and efficacy and also speed. And obviously, we need good teachers. There is insufficient faculty expertise. So there are not many experts out there. And part of the reason is, of course, we don't have any academic teachings, right? So everybody is self-taught. This is really what drove us to create GCLS. And very quickly here, to give you an idea of what we are doing right now, we are offering Executive Master of Science in Longevity. This is a 2-semester program, 1 year. It's really designed for professionals in the field. So people that have some prior experience or exposure to the field. So it can be medical doctors, but as I mentioned, it's also interesting people that have a insurance background, investors, lawyers, all these people with different backgrounds are part of our program as students. And it covers all the different aspects that I mentioned before. There are some other programs out there, which I'm a big fan of. So there cannot ever be enough education. I think, however, they're a little bit more on the short side, maybe focusing more on the practical application for different professions, like medical doctors, for instance. But I think it's safe to say that we're going to see more academic education around in the near future, which is a good thing. And maybe to come to a close here, because I was asked to stick to my timing in order we have enough time to discuss various points. Something that I haven't seen so far is longevity's Whole of Man. And Whole of Man was something that in the 1930s really drove this acceleration of awareness of public health initiatives. The American Public Health Association back then was aware of the fact that the American households didn't have a deep enough understanding of how their bodies work and what could be the benefits of looking after themselves of public health measures. And in order to get more awareness for this, they looked at, I think it was Germany, but definitely Europe, for a new educational model or something that created interest in the things we can do in order to stay healthy. And they created a health museum that coincided with the New York World Fair in the late 1930s. And this was called an interactive exhibit called The Whole of Man that really showed how the human body works. And this was done at a time when people didn't have access to the internet. And it I think, was very impressive. And there were millions of visitors. And it really shows that effective health education doesn't necessarily have to be just academic or definitely not boring. It should be engaging. And therefore, I'm on the lookout and I hope to see this longevity's Whole of Man in the future. And it could be that it's out there already or will be. It's probably going to be a Netflix show or a podcast or something like that, which really captivates people, gets them to be more interested in this field. We see it happening every day. It's wonderful to see that every conference I go to is getting bigger year by year. There is a constant influx of new people interested in this. And it's not just people that are consumers. It's a lot of clever minds that really promote this field, do research, but it doesn't always have to be research because you, again, have to have this translation of findings. So we just as badly need people that invest, that build companies, that treat people, etc. And if we as GCLS, by providing access to education, can help with that in some small way, we are very proud of this. And therefore, I'm very happy to have had the chance to share a bit with you what we are doing and why we are doing it, because it's another opportunity to get people excited about this. And I'm very happy to answer questions that you might have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful and quite the overview. We have one question already in the chat. I also put one in the chat. Maybe mine is a little bit more broader, which is, I'm not sure if I got this correct. So please excuse me if I didn't, but what in your definition of longevity, I think that you're mostly focusing on preventative longevity. So not so much on regeneration, rejuvenation, maybe even things like replacement or something. Is that roughly accurate?
No, maybe I misspoke in this case. But of course, preventative approaches are very important. And I think it serves, as a very good way to highlight the difference between medicine, for instance, where of course you have these more reactive approaches too, right? As soon as there is a problem, medicine comes and tries to replace it. Maybe it's the organ or whatever, or treats the underlying source. And we try, I think, a little early on to prevent the onset of the problem, but it's definitely part of what longevity science is all about. Sorry for misspoke. Yeah.
No, it's good. Maybe I just misheard it. Okay, great. We have John Hemming with a question. Do you want to unmute? Do you want me to ask you a question? Feel free to unmute now. And if you don't, in 30 seconds, I'll ask yours.
Well, it's all right. Our video's not come up. What evidence is there for biohacking being a bad idea?
I think that's an excellent question. And I'm sorry if I put it in a way that sounds absolute. The thing is that the way that many biohackers approach this is that they want to circumvent the established field of scientific analysis by saying, okay, I tried out myself and I'm, it's upon me, the risk of maybe not working or having downside effects for my body. I just tried out because I think it's a good idea. And I think there is a very good reason. My background is pharmacy. So obviously, I'm a big fan of the way that people go about doing preclinical studies in the beginning, then looking at animal models to see, can it work? Does it have negative effects? And then going into, of course, clinical studies on man, trying it out at the different stages where you begin with a few people and then bigger numbers in order to ensure that something both is effective and safe. And if you circumvent this proven model, then of course you do, I think in some cases at your personal risk that can be severe depending on what we are talking about. Sometimes it's things that I think everybody agrees are quite safe anyway to start with. But when it comes to things like peptides or stem cell treatments, where you don't exactly know what's happening because it's never been really clear from a scientific perspective, it's not something I would advise to do, generally speaking.
So you don't have any evidence?
Any evidence?
I asked, what evidence do you have?
Statistically speaking, I don't think there is a number of saying that in.
No, there's no evidence.
All right. Wait, John, you muted. If you want to make
okay, if you have no evidence, sorry. If you have no evidence, I don't mind you saying I have no evidence that biohacking is a bad idea. You have lots of theoretical positioning, but you have no evidence. That's okay. I don't mind. Not a problem.
Yes, concerns versus evidence.
What records do you have of people getting into a bad situation through biohacking?
I think biohacking in this case has to be defined what you're trying to accomplish, right? Because it's a large field. If we're talking about trying out a supplement and hoping it has a beneficial effect, that's fine. If you try biohacking and doing things that are perilous, I think, in to in the minds of most medical experts, then probably without me having a statistical number for you, whether it's going to work out in 59% of cases or 31. But I think it's also the question of what can be the downside, right? Like maximum downside. If you try something out that in the worst case gives you a tummy ache, that's fine. If you do something that can be really dangerous, of course, it's up to you. But I don't think it has been ever looked at from a statistical perspective, how often that can go wrong or not, because it depends on what you try to do.
I would
Wait,
accept.
John, we'll leave it there.
extreme
Thank you so
biohacking.
much, John. We have Steve with a follow-up question. Steve, go for it.
I can think of good examples of how biohacking can go wrong. A good example of that was back in my youth when antioxidants became the cure of the decade. And many people took antioxidants with the expectation that would improve their antioxidant defense systems. And it didn't work out that way at all. That's an example of a downside of biohacking. But the point that I would like to make is that if you take a certain individual, particular individual, and they or a professional rank their risk factors in terms of severity, and you look at the ones that are most severe, and those are treated with biohacking technologies, you're in a sense squaring the life extension curve by addressing their most serious risk factor. And the outcomes of that are likely to be overall quite positive.
Of course, generalizing is always tough. And I didn't want to come across as somebody who thinks that people taking responsibility for their health is generally a bad thing. I think it's always a question of the risk involved. It's really important that people have a good understanding of what they're trying to do, right? If it's maybe repurposing a drug that is well known in terms of what it does, in terms of side effects, you may not be facing any terminal problem, right? So it's not going to kill you. Exactly. Okay. Maybe I'm taking aspirin for other uses than just a headache, and that's going to be fine. If you're trying out going to a clinic in whatever, Manila, getting a stem cell treatment, I think it's a big risk. But of course, it's down to the individual to decide whether it's worth it or not. But in terms of being an academic, I typically like to see a treatment going through a very rigorous testing phase before it becomes available to the large public.
I love how
that
it
is
jumps.
the case with something like.
Can we stop talking about biohacking and actually talk more about GCLL?
Yeah,
GCLL?
let's get there. I love how we jump straight into kind of like one of the ethics and efficacy classes of possibly the program that you're offering. But I'm also really curious to learn a little bit more, kind of, I guess, zooming out on a meta level. I know that you discussed it like in the second to last slide a little bit, but could you go into some depth and a little bit more on what type of classes are you offering and like what types of opportunities to collaborate are you seeking? Are you looking to onboard students? If so, when? Are you looking to onboard lecturers? If so, when? What's like roughly coming ahead at you in the next like few months to a year that people could get excited about to collaborate on?
And just the basic, what exactly, it's a higher education institute, but it's one degree program, which is 12 months long from the website, it looks like, and you've got it in courses, but these are almost more like just a couple week courses, and then you've got faculty. Just give us the overall logical structure and then go to Allison's what you're looking for to the next level.
No, absolutely. Happy to. As you mentioned, it's a 12-month program, 2 semesters. The reason for that is that we think it's, of course, a very diverse field where you have to look into the different aspects of longevity, as I said, very holistically. And this is why we divided it into different modules or courses or whatever you may call them. And each of them, of course, has a different aspect. You start typically as a student by looking into the biology of aging, which I think is super important. As I mentioned before, many of our students are medical doctors, so they have, I think, a pretty good understanding of the human body. But since we are also accepting people without a life science background, essentially, I think we have to ensure that people know, okay, what are the problems essentially? So what are the mechanisms that drive aging, the hallmarks of aging, so to speak? And then we look into different fields like the diagnostics that are available to us or medical/pharmaceutical intervention. Then there is, of course, the big field of supplements, with supplements being a very difficult topic because whether it's a supplement or a drug or just an off-label chemical that you use, depends very much on where you are based, not so much on the substance, right? So NMN used to be a supplement in the US. It's probably going to be a drug. It always has been just a chemical in Europe that is being used off-label by people privately. And then, of course, we look into psychological factors, societal factors, and many more. So this is why we structured it into the different modules. And the whole program was really built for professionals in the field for a simple reason. When we looked at what's happening, we felt that it's not so much the 18-year-olds looking to understand the human body or trying to treat people, but they are not, maybe not now, I hope so in the future.
So I'm sorry, we're running out of time, and I want you to tell me less on the motivation and more on the logical of what's actually there. It's a 12-month program or 2-semester program. You've got these different courses. Is it you take the courses in order, or are they you take the courses in whatever order you want? Is it one just program where you just take these 10 courses in order and then you get your degree? And you're calling it a whole higher education institution. Are you planning on adding more courses or more degree programs, or is this going to be it? And this is the thing.
No. So these courses are one after the other. You have to pass them. There are weekly tests, etc. There is a master thesis that you have to write at the end. And we are going to have more courses, but we had to start somewhere. So we are probably also going to look into specific shorter certification courses for professionals. There are, of course, people that are interested in longevity science as the whole field. But for instance, there are medical doctors that are more interested into what is out there that they can use already. So not so much the future orientated new technologies, but what are the diagnostics they can use, the tools, the treatments that are available to them right now. And of course, this is a different course that is going to be CME accredited. And that is something that will be structured a bit differently if we know that we are just catering to doctors, for instance. So we are going to add to that one after the other. But of course, this is a process that is ongoing.
And it's all virtual. And so all your faculty are virtual. So you're the main guy who's running the institution itself. Is there
they do their own. Now, of course, we have our faculty that is at place, but the thing is with the professionals that they cannot relocate to Switzerland for a full year. So this is why we said it has to be an online study program. We get together once per semester. We're going to have our very first semester symposium, as we call it, in Geneva at the end of October, 18th and 19th. It's, by the way, open to the public, so other people can come too, where we have workshops and classes and live lectures. But the way it works is that people are very happy that they can get access to the education online. And if we see at any point that there is enough interest to merit a program that is in person, whether that's the 2-semester master's program or a shorter course, then we will be very happy to make that accessible. But the problem is that we found out, for instance, and this is a learning for ourselves too, that Switzerland, of course, restricts ourselves in terms of access for students. Because, for instance, there's a wonderful lady from Iran that finds it quite difficult to enter, and it's a bit more expensive. So we are now thinking about maybe offering the semester symposium also in Dubai next semester, because that is simply easier for people to get to and also a bit cheaper. But of course, these are learnings that we do as we get along.
So can I ask a question?
Yes, we had one, Jen, and then a question about faculty, but go for it, one, Jen.
Yeah, maybe it's combined with some of the other questions. Yeah, who are the faculty? How are you going to get it? I teach a course. I teach several courses on longevity science. How many hours is it doing? My course, I looked at the price. It's 25,000 Swiss francs. My course is $425. What do I get for the extra 24,000 Swiss francs?
I don't know your course. So the answer to the question is, of course, that we try to be a very holistic provider of education in the field.
How many hours of education do you get for the year? How many hours is it?
Oh, it's over 1,000. It's 60 CTS points. Every CTS point corresponds to 25 hours of studying. So it's actually quite a lot of time people have to invest.
How many lecture hours?
Every course has its different modules. Each module has several lectures. Hard for me to say out of the blue. Dozens, hundreds.
And
You have to do tests, you have to do exams, you have to write essays, you have to write a master's thesis. So it's really an academic program. It's not just a course. I know there are several courses out there. I think some of them are very good. Unfortunately, I don't know yours. But if you want to learn about the faculty too, they're of course available on our webpage. People can see that. I think we're very transparent.
How are the faculty chosen?
They are chosen depending, of course, on their prior experience. So we do have people from various backgrounds. We have medical doctors that are treating patients in a longevity context. We have basic researchers, both from an academic world, but also people from more of a corporate setting. I think this is one of the good things about being a private school and institution, that we can also work with companies. I think there is a lot of good projects out there. Longevity itself really is driven by private investment. I mentioned it before. We have people that are advisors, for instance, a lady from Dubai that advises in public health, the government of UAE. So really different backgrounds. We do have some investors, people talking about how to invest carefully in this sector. And we try, of course, to enlarge our faculty. It's ongoing. We have some professors, we have people that are more from the private sector. Obviously, since we try to be more holistic here, we have to ensure that we have experts from the different fields.
All right, amazing. I also just posted a link to the faculty and other information about the course online and the university online.
Yeah, I think there is a question regarding the course from Alex Seth.
Do you know Alex Zarankorov? I'm assuming, correct, Cal?
Oh, yeah, I know from Evelyn Bishop, the course, right?
yes, and it's great.
They put on a couple courses. What's your general impression of your course of study? You don't know Ranjan's, but relative to all the other things you know are out there that are most similar to this.
I think it's the extent and the size. So I know Evelyn's course. I've been part of one of her meetings. We get together regularly at the congresses, next time in Copenhagen, where we also discuss doing something together. I think it's a great course because it serves as an introduction. It gives you, it's a CME course, continuing medical education. You get a point for that. I think you need 50 points per year in the US. So I think this gives you an impression about the extent of the course. It's not massive, but it's a wonderful introduction. And I think what we do is at the other end of the spectrum, being 2 semesters, there's probably a lot of space required for courses that are in between this in terms of content and size. I think we're a bit more theoretical. They are maybe more practical, right? Because it's really for medical doctors. We talk about science. They talk about, mostly from my understanding, what's out there right now. I don't know. They also have.
So I think it's probably fair to say you're in the middle, right? Because there's also a couple of PhD programs now, right? The Buck had one with USC, and there's a couple coming along as formal PhD. And so you're in the middle of size between her more practical, shorter, and and there's, I think, a good room in that middle. I think so. It's a good.
Yeah. Also, I think the PhD ones, they are a little bit more research orientated, right? Because you have to do a research project. In our case, you write a master's thesis. So this is also can be a research project, but it can also have other major topics or focuses. So it's a bit different. We do work with a number of universities. I'm also talking, for instance, with SENS about maybe sending our students there, doing some research. But the thing is, again, we are trying to cater to the professionals, so they are not going back to do a PhD, working for a research institute for 2 or 3 years. They want to focus on their professional lives. And this is what we're doing right now. Hopefully, or maybe we're going to offer a PhD course too. But I think we first need to get our first generation of students finished, and then they can continue with PhD with us maybe.
Yeah, that's a great segue to my last question, which is the one that I already asked prior. But now that we have a little bit more context on the course and what it offers and the requirements, is what's happening in the next months, in this effort? How can people get engaged if they want to? Are there going to be different signups open? If so, what should people be looking out for? How can people find out more if they're really curious to collaborate in various different roles?
Yeah, we are very open to collaboration. We are very grateful that we already collaborate also with people from the private field, companies too. We do it just in the context of research. So we are not doing we're not getting commissions. We are not creating products with them, but we are interested looking into questions I think that are very relevant. For instance, what we have been doing, we work with Ludo and Mercer, which are very much into all the aspects of healthcare and the workplace environment, trying to see that if we can show maybe that epigenetics show that longevity intervention makes people not only younger from a biological standpoint, but also helps to boost productivity. This could be something that incentivizes employers to help their employees invest into that. Depending on where you live, this is very often, a fringe benefit that this could be very interesting. We work, for instance, with a very large, successful testing laboratory in Germany. They do efficacy testing for household products and safety testing, and we put them in touch with an epigenetic laboratory in order to develop a test for. It's of course not. We're not talking here in this case about curing age-associated diseases, but I think it's important that we create a test, and we do that from a scientific point. We are not selling the test afterwards, but we are bringing this project about where they create a test to test dermal cells for their epigenetic age, because you have so many anti-aging products out there. This is just billions of dollars spent every year for products that supposedly help you make you longer. But the question is, does it really do anything? And I think it's important to have tests for that. These are the things that we do. I think because you mentioned the next few months, we are very proud that we are going to have our semester symposium happening in Geneva with lots of very interesting talks and lectures given by our faculty and by third-party researchers. So this is hopefully something where people come and join us. I know it's a long travel for people outside Europe, but we are happy that they take the expenses and do, I think, different to other such conventions. It's a non-profit, so to speak, meaning people pay just cost for dinner, lunch, hosting the event. But I think it's very reasonably priced compared to what other conferences I've been to. And yeah, there is a question. No, there is no career pause required for the study. So it's really flexible. This is the idea, doing it online. You can stop, you can continue at any point of time. This is something we encourage people to do while they work. We unfortunately cannot guarantee it takes you just 2 semesters, because obviously it depends on how much time you invest. But on general, I think it's possible, and we try to support this as much as we can.
Is it synchronous, or do you go through it at your own pace? Are all the things recorded, or?
We do have live sessions, but obviously we try to limit that because it's so hard to have to do that, because we got students from the US, from Dubai, from India, from Japan. So it's really hard. It's a bit, I say, depressive for the professors if they do the live event and nobody is there. So we try to do it. Sometimes we do it live and then we record it and put it online. Sometimes we have the recording online all the time, so to speak. It's a learning experience how to manage that with so many different time zones. But the idea is to make it as synchronous as possible so people can proceed at their own pace.
Is there communication between the people going through the program? Do they?
Yeah, absolutely. We, for instance, do have research tasks for them where they analyze PubMed articles, summarize them, give their opinion on new treatments. And they are, for instance, posted in the forum where others interact with them, give their own ideas. So we foster that as much as possible. And this is why I think it's important, even though it's not required for people to come to the live event, the semester symposium, where they meet the faculty and their colleagues and fellow students. Not something which is required, because I don't want to be the one saying to them, you have to be there. Because if you're living in Japan and it's just too expensive, too long a flight, or it doesn't fit with your professional schedule, then that should be okay too. But of course, the more you can do in order to get together and build a community, the better, of course.
Have you considered reaching out to the massive education providers like Udacity and Coursera and things like that, and trying to come up with a partnership there where they're large,
wonderful
students can get access to this?
Yeah, wonderful idea. So that's definitely something that we are looking into. So we are working on getting accreditations across the globe. This is something that you have to do when the program has started. So you cannot do it beforehand. We are going to have international accreditation, national accreditation with the medical associations, at least in the EU and the US. So these are the steps that we take now. We want to have more courses or programs. Sorry, sometimes the German native comes through. So we have this one program right now. We're going to have different programs, and each program always has different modules.
Dominik? Is Dominik only frozen or am I frozen? Okay, just Dominik. Dominik, we can't see you anymore. We might have to close it then, Dominik. It was really nice to have you if you can hear us.
Maybe just the time is up. Well, if you can hear me,
Yes,
I want
yes.
very much for the questions and what. Yeah. Okay.
We can hear
no,
you
I'm
and
back.
we can
Sorry.
see you.
Wonderful. No, I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time today and also for the questions, which I find to be very interesting. I'm sorry if in some cases maybe I came across as being too harsh on the biohacking front.
That's quite all right.
We have to be careful with the words that we use. I'm aware of this.
Look, there are many different opinions in this group, and some people I think were internally applauding you. Some people are like, I'm more pro biohacking, and I think you should be able to say exactly what you want on this in the seminar. Thank you so much for coming. I'm glad, Carl. Thanks a lot for helping me moderate this and really getting to the bottom of bits and pieces. I know that there's probably plenty of other questions that people still have open for you. It's a really big undertaking, and if you have any questions to Dominik that you didn't answer yet, then please email me and I'll try to make a connection if you're open to it, Dominik. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming. I also have like plenty more questions. We, for example, try to get one of our existential hope world building courses up on one of the massive online course providers. And there's a lot to finesse, I guess, until they're in that right shape and format. So it's like kind of tricky, like more tricky than I had expected prior to that. But anyway, lots to discuss, but congrats on getting this off the ground. Thanks everyone for your amazing questions. I won't be the reason why we have another minute more on the clock. My German heart is crying, but I really enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks everyone for participating. And I'm really excited to see this, to see this started. Please share anything that we should share with the seminar group, and we'll make sure that to distribute any information that's relevant. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Alice. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Have a good one, everyone.